Juan Carlos Ferrero has opened up about Carlos Alcaraz several times since they split last year. But what he just revealed about Alcaraz at an Alicante business conference is easily the most honest, raw thing we have heard from anyone in his circle since the breakup. He described him as a blend of Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer. Then, he added something else. Something that has absolutely nothing to do with praise and everything to do with a massive issue we have been tracking for months. Nobody in that room saw it coming, and once you hear it, you will never view Alcaraz's ultimate potential the same way again. You clicked this video because of the title, assuming you already knew exactly what Ferrero was going to say. You probably expected another emotional interview, just another chapter of them publicly processing a bitter split that they are still hashing out right in front of the cameras. That drama is real, and we do need to cover it because the context is crucial. But what Ferrero shared in Alicante is completely different. It is a whole new angle, and when we finally reach it, which happens in about 3 minutes, once you grasp the full picture of what Ferrero has been up to since December, it will hit you much harder than if I just played the clip right now. First, let us look at where Ferrero went. In December 2025, when Alcaraz posted online that they were splitting after 7 years and 6 Grand Slam trophies, Ferrero released a statement containing 5 quiet words that revealed exactly who pulled the plug. "I wish I could have continued. That is not how a man who chose to leave speaks. That is the voice of someone who had the choice made for him." Soon after, an insider close to the camp confirmed to Clay Tennis and RG Media that serious friction had been building behind the scenes between Ferrero and Alcaraz's father over managing the young star's career. It was not about tennis. It was about control, deciding what a 22-year-old superstar owes to those who helped him rise versus what he owes to his own future. The tension between Alcaraz's family and his coaches had been building for a while, something the 2025 Netflix documentary made obvious to anyone watching closely. We saw Alcaraz push back against Ferrero's heavy demands, while his coach kept pushing for a strict discipline the young player wanted to escape. On screen, they looked like a father and son who deeply care for each other, but simply cannot agree on who is actually in charge. Then came that Christmas interview with Marca, where Ferrero admitted, "Right now, I am hurting," confessing they just could not agree on key issues. He believed things might have been ironed out if they had only sat down to talk, but they never sat down. What makes that admission so haunting is what he left unsaid. It strongly implies that someone in Alcaraz's camp decided a conversation was not even worth having, that walking away was easier than trying to negotiate. Whether that call was made by Carlos, his father, or a joint decision about their broken bond, the final result was exactly the same. Ferrero walked away from the most dominant coaching run of the decade, left wondering what else they could have achieved together. By January, speaking from Bahrain, where he was coaching a talented young Spanish golfer, Ferrero had found some real perspective. He was finally ready to share something that caught the entire tennis community off guard. He had already rejected 4 offers to coach top 20 players. He just was not ready. Speaking with the extreme caution of a man weighing every single word, he noted that doors should never be slammed shut. He even hinted he might return to Carlos one day. Who knows, he could also end up coaching any other top player on the tour. That list includes Jannik, whose team reached out to offer support right after the split, a gesture that was either polite etiquette or a quiet business move. By April, during a television interview, his tone had shifted. He was no longer mourning the loss. He was analyzing. He stated Alcaraz has the skill, physical power, and mental toughness to become an all-time great, pointing out he has already shattered several records. He claimed the sole obstacle in his path would be losing his inner motivation, a real danger for any young athlete who reaches the absolute top before building the emotional maturity required to sustain a long, exhausting career. Then, he dropped a single sentence that holds the key to everything else. "I always told him that when motivation fades, discipline must take over." That is not just some generic sports cliché. It is a direct, personal lesson hammered into one player over 7 intense years. And the fact that Ferrero continues to preach this publicly after their split, still aiming it directly at Alcaraz and framing his future around this unresolved lesson, tells you everything about where Ferrero believes the work was cut short when that door was slammed. Then came the Alicante event in May 2026, a corporate leadership summit, not a sports presser, packed with over 2,000 executives, 0 tennis reporters in sight. That was where we finally got Ferrero's raw thoughts on Alcaraz, completely free from the usual guarded filters of the tour. When a player possesses 10 different weapons, they often do not know which one to choose. He can do so much with every shot that organizing his game was tough. To him, Alcaraz blends Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer. He realized this the very first moment he watched him play as a 12-year-old kid at his academy in Villena. The sheer creativity, the absolute confidence, the dynamism, the rare ability to play whatever the moment demanded. From one spot, a teenage Alcaraz could unleash a delicate drop shot, a sharp angled winner, a heavy slice, or a lob, all from the exact same setup, and each option was lethal. According to him, the hardest part of coaching Alcaraz was never developing the physical side, nor managing his mindset, navigating his hectic schedule, handling sponsorships, or dealing with the spotlight at just 16 years old. The real challenge was choosing which strategy to deploy, simply because the kid in front of him could play them all. Let that sink in. What Ferrero is really saying here is far from the simple praise it appears to be. And right there, in the space between polite praise and harsh reality, is where our story begins. Top-tier tennis coaches focus on constraint, not restriction, but constraint. And that distinction matters immensely. You take every tool a player has and systematically narrow their options. Not to limit what they can achieve, but to sharpen exactly what they will execute. Because making clear decisions under intense pressure is the dividing line between champions and those who fall short. Federer at his peak was never just playing free. His game was calibrated with total precision. Every single shot was pulled from a highly specific menu of choices, calculated by his team to yield the highest probability of winning the point. Rafael Nadal was even more disciplined. His formulaic tactical approach was so bulletproof that rivals spent over a decade searching for cracks and finding absolutely nothing. Djokovic has the most logical setup of all. Darren Cahill once compared coaching him not to guiding a player, but to monitoring an automated system that already knows exactly what to do. Your only job is to optimize the environment around it. But Alcaraz? He gave Ferrero none of that structure. What Ferrero actually outlined on that stage: 10 different weapons, the capacity to do a dozen things with one strike, a rush of creativity in the final microsecond of a point, is a profile so vast, it actively resists the constraint required to make a champion consistent. And that is the quiet danger hiding inside the praise. When your mind can choose between a drop shot, a sharp angled forehand, or heavy topspin, or a lob off the exact same ball, and all four options are genuinely lethal, the brutal mental toll of choosing falls on the kid in real time, at absolute top speed, right when the entire match is hanging in the balance. A young athlete who has not mastered that mental strain, who still weighs four viable options in the split second before hitting, will make unforced errors that look like lazy mistakes to the crowd, but are actually proof of a style that holds more sheer potential than a human mind can quickly process under fire. Ferrero lived this reality himself, and his recent statements in Alicante are the clearest window we have had since their partnership ended. The toughest part of guiding Alcaraz was never teaching him new tools. It was teaching him which weapon to leave behind. Now, before looking at what lies ahead for Alcaraz, let me play devil's advocate against my own theory. There is a completely different perspective to this story, and it is one you absolutely need to hear. The argument that Ferrero meant this as ultimate praise, not a subtle warning, sounds something like this. The history of tennis is full of players who possessed incredible shot variety and tactical depth. Roger Federer was legendary for the sheer scale of his arsenal, pulling unexpected answers out of thin air to stun his opponents. But what truly set Federer apart was not some coach forcing him into a simpler style. Instead, he slowly built a brilliant mental system that allowed him to navigate his massive arsenal at speed. He felt the right option instinctively, bypassing the heavy thinking that slows down younger players. Alcaraz is only 22. That mental processor takes years to develop. What looks like a bad decision today might look like pure genius at 26, once his internal system has had another 4 seasons to mature. That argument is incredibly valid, and I am not ignoring it. But it misses a key truth. Federer had Stefan Edberg guiding him towards simpler choices during major turning points. He later had Ivan Lubicic to reinforce the structured framework that made his execution machine-like in his 30s. The bond between player and coach that builds this mental engine isn't side work, it is the whole game. And the coaching partnership that spent 7 long years doing precisely that with Alcaraz is now gone, replaced by a brilliant, deeply trusted figure who was, it must be noted, handpicked and encouraged by Ferrero himself to take over. Yet he is still developing the 11-year understanding that Ferrero had gathered about how Carlos's mind handles intense pressure in the biggest moments. Lopez doesn't have that shorthand yet, he is still building it. And his recent wrist injury, despite costing him ranking points and tournament time, buys them precious months to construct that bond before they are tested on the grandest stage. There is another crucial detail in Ferrero's Alicante speech that seems to have gone entirely unnoticed. It quietly reshapes how we should compare Alcaraz to both Nadal and Federer. Ferrero revealed he taught Alcaraz to use the drop shot on return, a tactic he watched Federer deploy with devastating success against rivals who couldn't adjust to the change of pace. As a former world number one watching from the sidelines, he spent years witnessing Federer dismantle players with that exact return. So when he decided to add it to Alcaraz's arsenal, he didn't simply drill the physical motion. He passed down the philosophy behind it, the realization that a point you can win with a thunderous blast, you can also win with a delicate whisper. Because an opponent who cannot guess which option is coming has already lost the mental battle. That is the core of Federer's philosophy, winning the point in the mind before you ever swing the racket. Reading between the lines of Ferrero's talk in Alicante, it is clear. He spent 7 years trying to fuse that exact philosophy into a player who shares Nadal's legendary refusal to ever give up on a single point. Merging those two mentalities in a single athlete is spectacular, but for any coach, it is almost impossible to manage. Look at it this way. Nadal's mindset demands fighting for every ball. Federer's style means winning the point before the rally even starts. An athlete running both mindsets at once will play tennis that looks like a highlight reel when it clicks, and a total disaster when it does not. Ferrero spent 7 long years trying to figure out, play by play, which of those two mental programs to run. Standing in Alicante, he told 1,200 business executives who had never watched tennis that this was the toughest challenge of his entire career. Now let us look at the physical side, because Ferrero's words link directly to that wrist injury in a way most tennis analysts have completely missed. When a player can strike 10 different ways at any second, their body is forced to absorb 10 completely different physical stresses over a single match. Every weapon has a physical price. Take the inside-out forehand whipped with extreme topspin. This shot, which unleashes Alcaraz's fastest racket speed, strains the extensor carpi ulnaris tendon at the back of the wrist as the hand rotates to create that heavy spin. His serve demands a completely different rotational strain through the shoulder and forearm, and hitting a perfect drop shot return requires suddenly breaking the racket. That sudden stop shoots a violent tearing force straight through the wrist joint on impact. That is a totally different strain from the forehand, hammering the exact same joint, in the same match, sometimes back-to-back. Every single time Alcaraz hesitates and chooses in that split second Ferrero talked about, that sudden burst of creativity at the final moment, his body takes the brunt of that choice. When a player cycles through 10 options instead of 3, the sheer variety of stress on the wrist in one match is vastly higher than for an opponent with a simpler style. This is not a guess. The actual diagnosis is tendinosis, an inflamed wrist tendon sheath. It is the exact same injury that forced Nadal out of Roland Garros and Wimbledon in 2016. With pain burning on the thumb side, we can point exactly to the spot in his wrist where all that heavy pressure finally built up. Look at the timeline. A forearm medical timeout at the Australian Open in January, then the wrist giving out in Barcelona in April. This is not from one sudden, unlucky injury on court. It is a story of a joint taking too much load for weeks and months, far beyond what it could handle, until it eventually reached its breaking point. So, Ferrero's dilemma as a coach and this physical injury are deeply linked. They are just two sides of the same coin. A playing style that does everything eventually demands everything from the body. And the body, which does not go to coaching seminars or study tennis strategy, deals with that strain the only way it knows how, by handing the player a bill they cannot ignore. Now, Samuel López has inherited both issues at once. The strategy challenge of helping Alcaraz choose between 10 weapons faster and cleaner, plus the massive physical task of shielding the body that must deliver all 10 of them. Can he solve both as he learns how Alcaraz's unique mind and body cope under intense pressure? That is the big question. It will decide if the next 5 years match what Ferrero envisioned, a mature, Federer-like force climbing to heights no player has ever reached, or just another sad story about what might have been. Let me be blunt. Ferrero did not stand up in Alicante just to praise a young star he no longer coaches. He showed up because he was invited, and because enough time has passed since their split for the lingering pain to turn into crystal clear clarity. And that clarity shone through when he stood before 1,200 people and laid bare the absolute hardest challenge of his coaching career. Balancing 10 weapons and that split-second creativity. Organizing that chaos is not some fond, happy memory. That is a mentor explaining, with raw honesty, after 5 months of reflection, the brutal price of coaching that level of talent, and by extension, the toll it takes on the young athlete to carry that heavy gift, and whether a human body can actually keep paying that physical tax across another 12 or 15 years on the Pro Tour. There is a tiny detail from that Alicante speech that almost everyone missed. I want to pause on it, because it completely changes how we view Ferrero's words. He noted that one key weapon he built directly into Alcaraz's arsenal was using the drop shot as a return. Specifically, a tactic he had watched Federer employ against rivals for years, seeing it succeed, understanding exactly why it worked, and teaching it to a 16-year-old in Vienna. He knew the kid had the soft hands to pull it off and the raw instinct to know when to drop it. Think about what that reveals about Ferrero's early vision. He was not just trying to build a standard Carlos Alcaraz playstyle. No, he was building a library of lethal weapons taken from the absolute best players in history, loading them one by one into an athlete who actually had the physical power to use them all. He was literally building a hybrid of Nadal and Federer with his own hands, across a decade of meticulous, daily work. He knew precisely what he was shaping, but he also knew this ultimate creation would eventually become the single hardest riddle he would ever have to solve as a tennis coach. There is a real Promethean tragedy in that. The man who sparked this wildfire then spent 7 years desperately trying to control it, and when that fire finally grew too big for him to manage, not because it died out, but because those in control decided they wanted a new keeper, Ferrero stepped aside, knowing the blaze was still raging, leaving a massive question mark over whether any other coach could ever contain it the same way. He even urged Samuel López to take over, stating so publicly in his March interview. He was the first to urge Samu to accept, saying he trusts López completely. It brings him peace of mind, knowing López deeply understands years of hard work. Then he added a quiet line that lingered longer than the rest. Seeing someone I trust so much coaching Carlos stings a bit, but I am getting better at it. That is not a man who has moved on. He is simply moving forward, and those are two completely different things. Moving on means a chapter is closed. Moving forward means the wound is open, but you carry it with you instead of letting it drag you down. Just look at Ferrero's 5 interviews since December, Marca at Christmas, Clay Tennis in January, La Sexta in April, and now Alicante in May. That is not a man who has moved on. This is a man moving forward, carrying everything he built, searching for the language to make sense of his departure, and finally finding the perfect words 5 months later. 10 weapons, last-second creativity, a mix of Nadal and Federer that was the hardest thing he ever tried to manage. Let's compare that to what Tony Nadal said about the breakup when it first happened. Tony Nadal is one of the rare figures in tennis whose view on the coach-player dynamic carries real weight, having lived inside it for his entire career. He said, and these are his exact words, "It is natural for Carlos to speak up, since the player is the one on court, and in his mind, keeping the game running smoothly is all that matters." Without naming names, he also noted that the player pays the bills, and usually pays to hear exactly what they want to hear. That is hardly a compliment. It is a harsh truth from a man who spent 23 years coaching his nephew into the greatest clay court player in history. He knows better than anyone where the power dynamic in a long coach-athlete partnership inevitably leads. It reaches a point where the player's thirst for control outweighs the coach's ability to deliver results. Then the split happens, amidst polite regrets. Even Rafa and Tony Nadal parted ways back in 2017. Federer and Paul Annacone split too. Meanwhile, Djokovic has cycled through more coaches than anyone else in the top 5. This is not just an Alcaraz problem, it is the nature of the sport, revealing a harsh truth about elite tennis coaching. These partnerships work until they do not, and the breaking point is rarely what the public thinks it is. That Netflix documentary showing Alcaraz resisting Ferrero in 2025 was not the actual end of their partnership. It was public proof of a tension building long before anyone outside the academy in Vienna ever noticed. Now, Ferrero is speaking at a business conference in Alicante, and the distance from his old life has given him a new perspective. It sparked the most brutally honest reflection on his 7 years there that he has ever shared publicly. What he was actually doing was building something completely unprecedented in tennis. A fusion of Nadal and Federer with 10 weapons, driven by a raw creativity that resisted any attempt to tame it. He built it, he guided it, he won 6 Grand Slams. And then, it was stripped away before he could complete the hardest phase. Not adding new weapons, but teaching Alcaraz how to manage the mental load of having so many. That unfinished task now falls to Samuel López. And his lingering wrist injury is the physical toll of a style that demands 10 split-second choices every single point, all through a grueling 10-month season. since Carlos Alcaraz was 19. Ferrero built something truly legendary. He admitted as much in Alicante, speaking to an audience expecting a talk on corporate leadership. Instead, they received the deepest breakdown of coaching genius, both his and Alcaraz's, that we have heard since their high-profile split. The blend of Nadal and Federer is real. The 10 weapons are real. That last-second creativity is real. The big question is who guides all this talent now, how they handle it, and whether the wrist absorbing all that physical damage can hold together long enough to chase historic career records. That remains the ultimate mystery in men's tennis today, and it is the exact storyline this channel will be following from every single angle.